Hey guys, real quick, I just want to address my webcam again. As you can see, it's in kind of a weird place. If I'm looking at my visuals up here, it's a little off, but that's all right. We'll figure it out. So as you can see on the screen, I have three different things that should look familiar to you. I have a bar, a south, like a regular shopping mall. It looks like South Park Mall to me, but it's not. And then a Planet Fitness emblem down there, which will symbolize like a gym. So obviously, I would love to go to the bar and grab a beer with my friends or go and grab a new pair of shoes at the mall. And you can't forget that after class workout that I always love to get in. Um, but obviously, with the world situation right now with COVID-19, uh, we're not able to do any of these things, which is kind of a pain. It puts a real damper on my lifestyle, honestly. As I'm sure it does on yours as well. But what I don't have up on the screen is actually my number one thing to do. And the number one thing to do is fishing. So there I am. That's a 3-year-old Jacob Prestidge for you. My dad actually took that photo, and that was taken on my grandpa's farm in Michigan. And that might not be my first fish, but it's definitely around the time I caught my first fish. And it's definitely the first fish I have a picture of that I caught. But this is something that I love to do. I do all kinds of fishing, anywhere from pond hopping to I have my own boat with my buddy. We go walleye trolling and perch fishing, anything on the lake, things like that, river fishing, fly fishing, stuff like that. But today, for this presentation, I'm going to talk to you about my absolute favorite kind of fishing, and that is river fishing and more specifically steelhead fishing. So, with no further ado, we're going to go ahead and move on. So, what you see here is the Rocky River. This is basically my backyard. It's about 30 minutes away from me. It's honestly great. But if you look on the left, you see what the river looks like in certain sections. It's not a very big river. It's pretty narrow compared to what most people think of rivers are, with boats moving in and out on them. But that's not the case with the Rocky River, at least for most of it. There is some places where boats can, I guess, drive on the river, but that's closer towards the lake and things of that nature, where there's like a harbor and stuff like that. But I don't really spend a whole lot of time up there. I worry more so about where I can catch steelhead, which is anywhere from the mouth of the river to just about even with Fairview Park. Some get past Fairview, but not very many at all. But what people think is a lot of times people think that the lake will dump into the river, but that's not the case. Actually, more often than not, it's the river, the stream, or creek, or whatever dumping into the lake, causing that outward current. And steelhead are one of those fish that come into the river a couple different times a season. It depends on the strain of the fish, but more often than not, you can find them anytime between early September to normally the first or second week of May, and that's normally when they go up the rivers and they spawn and drop their eggs and things of that nature. But as you can see on the right, I have the Rocky River highlighted in blue, and it doesn't look like a lot, but that's a whole lot of river there to fish, and it can be intimidating to people who aren't sure what they're doing, have never steelhead fished before, or just haven't even fished in general at all. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you guys where to find these fish and good fishing places to look for. So as you can see on your left, that's a ford actually. It has all those bubbles and everything you see. Fords are great for steelhead. A lot of times the fish will hold up there just because of that little like jump they got to make over that waterfall. Not all fish are, I guess, extremely eager to jump over that as soon as they get there. So they'll hold up in that deep pool. And as a rule of thumb is, if you see bubbles like that, it's normally a pretty good place to find steelhead. And these fords are typically pretty deep. I mean, this one's probably about 6 to 7 foot deep, right by that little wall there. So you definitely don't want to fall into it, but you definitely want to fish it because there is going to be steelhead there. The diagram on the right is probably the best, if not most accurate diagram I have ever seen for just breaking down the water structure and how to read water, and it's actually really good. But the number one place you want to fish for these steelhead, at least in my experience, is in these eddies. You see, it's the swirling water. They label it as swirling reverse current, which is sometimes the case. But a lot of times those fish will get out of the deep runs and the deep pools with all that current that you can see on the diagram, and they'll get into those eddies. That way they're not constantly fighting the current and constantly trying to keep themselves from getting swept downstream. But all these different places hold fish. Some exceed more than others depending on the year or the time of year. For example, the riffles, that's where the fish like to spawn. So you're gonna find those in like your early springtime. So like April's a great time for riffles. Late March is pretty good. Your eddies are pretty good year round. Same with your runs and your pools and your tail outs. But as it gets warmer outside, you want to start fishing that more shallow water because those fish are going to start to move in and start to spawn. But you can find fish in pretty much any of these locations year round. I mean, it's just depending on how you fish and the tactics you use. So riffles are great for fly fishing, but not so great for eddies and runs because those are deeper water. It's hard to get your bait down to the perfect depth where the fish are at and things of that nature. So that's just something to keep in mind. But now that you guys know where to fish, we got to figure out how you're going to catch these things. So that's going to take us into our next slide, which if you look on your left, that's something called a center pin reel. Now, it's not a necessity to have one of these. You can catch these fish with a regular spinning reel or I guess a fly rod too if you're into fly fishing, which I do some of that myself. But my absolute number one thing to use is a center pin. And that's because I do most of my steelhead fishing by drifting, which means I'm drifting afloat with a bait, either a jig or a spawn sack, through the strike zone and hoping that a fish takes that. The reason why this makes it so effective is because that reel is free spooling all the time, which means if you flick it, it's going to spin and spin and spin. It's got ball bearings in it. They're not cheap. Some people pay up to 800, some even more dollars for a reel just like that, and that's not even the rod. That's just the reel. Mine's not nearly that expensive. I paid about $500 for both my rod and reel together as a combo, but it's still not something that's too cheap. But those are ideal because as you're floating, you can let out just the right amount of line. That way, when the fish takes your bait, you can set the hook and there's no slack in your line, and it's just straight reel to fish, and then you can get a good hook set and start fighting the fish instantly. So now we're going to talk about what to use for them. So if you look in the diagram on the right, you see a steelhead jig. I've caught a bunch of fish on steelhead jigs, but my number one bait to use, in my opinion, is spawn sacks, which is that picture in the middle there. And that's basically just the eggs that you get from a fish that you keep, and you take them out of the fish. You do some certain things to them to cure them. A lot of guys have like secret formulas and stuff like that, but I just use regular stuff you buy from the store. Works out just fine for me. But then you tie them in little sacks, they call them like that. And it's the most natural looking bait for the fish. It's what they naturally eat in the rivers, besides like minnows and things of that nature. But it's just a really great bait. It provides the right visibility in the water, especially in murky conditions. Because that's something you got to think about when you're fishing a river. But you honestly can't beat a good spawn sack. But now, as far as the rig's concerned, if you look on the right, you can see your slip float, and that's so you can adjust your depth depending on where you're fishing. It's not set at a certain depth. You can go from, depending on how long your leader is, you can go from 2 feet all the way to pick a number. You can go to 12 feet if you want. It'd be pretty hard to cast, but you could do it. So anyways, you're going to have your slip float, and then you're going to have your split shot, which is just little sinkers that you can attach to your line to help you get down in the zone. And then you have your swivel, which is key because you need a swivel to attach your main line, which is normally monofilament, to your fluorocarbon leader. As you can see, it's an 8-pound fluorocarbon leader. You can use 10-pound if you want. You can use 6-pound if you want. It really depends on the water clarity. The more murky it is, the heavier line you can get away with, and vice versa. But the main reason why this is so important is because steelhead are really smart animals with really, really good eyesight. And if you're using a monofilament all the way to your hook, it's not going to work out too well for a couple reasons. One, mono floats, so it's not going to be conducive to keeping your bait deep into the strike zone. And two, mono actually refracts sunlight. So if it's clear water and it's sunny outside, it's going to be like a shiny line through the water. And those fish aren't going to have any of that. They're just not going to hit on that. They know that something's off and they want nothing to do with that. But your fluorocarbon, A, it's stronger. B, it sinks, so it helps you get down into the zone better. And C, it actually absorbs sunlight, which means it doesn't get shiny in the water in sunny conditions. So that's something to keep in mind. It's definitely a necessity. And it's something that, honestly, if you're going to steelhead fish, it's just one of those things that you really got to do. But with that being said, I'm going to show you what steelhead fishing and river fishing in general has done for me. And that is provide me with a whole lot of memories and a whole lot of good times, to be honest with you. I know I'm not smiling at all these pictures. There's a couple smirks here and there. Um, but it's honestly one of those things where you get out, it gets you in touch with nature, it teaches you patience. You know, every day you're not going to go out and slaughter them. You're not going to go out and catch 10 or 15. Like, honestly, a really good day steelhead fishing is if you just catch 3 or 4 fish, and anything above that is pretty outstanding. Um, at least at the beginning. As I got better at it, I started catching more fish and more fish. But that's beside the point. Another thing it's also done for me is, like I mentioned earlier, we can't go to gyms right now because everything's closed. But I fish almost every day, and most of the time I'm steelhead fishing like this, or at least river fishing, and that involves long walks through treacherous terrain. It's not uncommon for me to walk 2 to 3 miles a day when I'm fishing. Uh, it's good exercise. It gives me something to do that I can do literally all the time. Like, that's the one thing that the government's allowing pretty much anyone to do right now, and that's anything outdoors. And lucky for me, that's something that I truly enjoy and something that I do almost every chance I get. So honestly, fishing has just been great to me. It's really given me something to sink all my time and energy to. I would much rather do this than sit on the couch and play a video game, or, just go for a walk outside or anything like that. It's something that I really hope this presentation might have sparked a little fire underneath you guys and got you slightly interested in fishing. Maybe not to the point where you have to go out and do it yourself, but maybe to the point where you can at least think about and maybe want to experience some of these experiences that I have up here. Most of these pictures are either taken by my dad or my best friend Adam. And honestly, it's not necessarily catching the fish that's the best part about it, but it's having someone else there while you're catching the fish, or netting your buddy's fish or your dad's fish or something like that. And it's building that experience that's going to last with you a lot longer than getting a win on Fortnite or winning in 2K or something like that. And it's just really something that's impacted me. I really think it's helped me stay sane through this quarantine. And I really think it's something that most people would enjoy if they were to go ahead and give it a shot. So thanks for listening to my little spiel on fishing. I hope it's interested you a little bit, and go out there and try catching yourself some steelhead.